Good evening. Before I start, here's a quick question for you guys. Have you ever copied an image from a painting, photographs, magazines, journals, or other sources? When is it okay and when is not? In this world, we live in a culture that overflows with image and objects. Artists today incorporate these images and objects into their creative expressions, and this is what we call appropriation in art. A lobster in a telephone, a urinal on a pedestal, even sheets of music pasted into a collage, and Mona Lisa with the most touch. They are all appropriation. Before we begin, I am Ivor's Casas, and my partner Erika Orong will be discussing appropriation. Today, we'll be diving into everything you need to know about appropriation in art. Appropriation in art history refers to the practice of artists using pre-existing objects or images in their art with little transformation of the original. This means borrowing, copying, and altering images and objects that already exist. Now, appropriation has been a strategy used by artists for a super long time. Artists have used each other to study, to learn, and to use an inspiration and pay homage to. Hermione and had used Titian as a departure point for his own piece. So the key principle of appropriation in art is that something new is created when an artist borrows from an existing source. Appropriation in art has been around for centuries, but it is most commonly thought of in terms of 20th century artists like Andy Warhol and Barbara Corger. So Young 2008 posits five sorts of appropriation. The first one is object appropriation. Occurs when the position of a tangible work of art is transferred from members of one culture to members of another culture. Second, content. Occurs when an artist reuses an idea first expressed in the work of an artist from another culture. Third, style. When an artist produces works with stylistic elements which are common with the works of another culture. Fourth, motif appropriation. Occurs when an artist are influenced by the art of another culture other than their own without creating works in the same style. And last, subject appropriation. Occurs when outside represent a subject matter that is intended by insiders to be secret.
Now that you have already learned what appropriation is, now we will going to tackle the five types of appropriation. Appropriation can be confusing, as you know, because the line between borrowing, appropriating, and copying is quite often blurry. Just take this example. From what I have already said, it will be apparent that the sorts of activities classified as acts of appropriation are quite diverse. Another dimension of this complexity remains to be revealed. All acts of appropriation involve taking, but the sorts of things that can be taken, even if we limit ourselves to the arts. Arts are quite diverse. By my recounting, at least five quite different sorts of activities have been classified as acts of appropriation. Tangible works of art will be the first sort of item with which we'll be concerned. I will refer to the appropriation of such item as object. So the five facets of appropriation is the first one is the object of appropriation. When we say object of appropriation, it can also be called as material appropriation. It occurs when the possession of a tangible work of art, such as a sculpture or a painting, is transferred from members of one culture to members of another culture. So it has some sort of influence. The work of art is transferred from one culture to the other. So the example of this is the removal of the friezes from the Parthenon by Lord Elgin is often regarded as a paradigm case of object appropriation, and also the transfer of a native North American totem pole So a European museum would be also a case of such appropriation. Sort of item. The second sort of item that could be appropriated is intangible. This could be a musical composition, a story, or a poem. What do you mean by intangible? So it means that it is not capable of being perceived by the sense of touch. It's not like arts done by on or canvas or any medium. The second one is the content or the non-material appropriation. It will be my label for the sort of appropriation. When this sort of appropriation occurs, an artist has made significant reuse of an idea first expressed in the work of an artist from another culture. A musician who sings the songs of another culture has engaged in content appropriation, as has the writer who retells stories produced by a culture other than his own. In this appropriation, you are trying to something from the other culture, even if you're not part of it. It is your when you are fully immersed on the situation and so inspired to do it. An example of this is singing the anthem of another culture. Just take this example. Just imagine a foreigner singing the Lupang Hinirang. He is not part of the culture, yet he is trying to reuse the idea first expressed in the work of an artist from another culture. Another example of this is that as we Filipinos, we are singing uh, K-pop songs, other languages. So, to the content of that, we are trying to use the idea of other culture that we are not, even if we are not part of it. And the third one is the style. The third appropriation is the style or the stylistic appropriation. So, this appropriation is something less than an entire expression of an artist idea can be appropriated. Sometimes artists do not reproduce works produced by another culture, but still take this something from that other culture. In such cases, artists produce works with stylistic elements in common with the works of another culture. For example, are musicians who are not part of African American culture but who composed original jazz or blues works can be said to have engaged in appropriation in this sense. What do you mean by stylistic? It means they are not reproducing the art, but they are getting an idea to it. An example of this is the beating of the music, but the composition of the lyrics are not the same as the original. Kumbaga, kinunan lang na idea yung original work ng artist. The number four is motive appropriation. So, what is motive appropriation? So, it is another sort of content appropriation can be identified. This form of appropriation is related to style appropriation, but only basic motifs are appropriated. So, this sort of appropriation may be called motive appropriation. It occurs when artists are influenced. So, they are being influenced by the art of a culture other than their own without creating works in the same style. Just take example Picasso appropriated ideas from African carving in Les Mesdemoiselles d'Avignon on the year 1907, but his painting is not in African style. Similarly, the Green Stripe on 1905 by Henry Matisse is a Fauvist painting, but it self-consciously incorporates certain motifs from African art. In music, we can give the examples of Egort Stravinsky. For example, is his piano rag music in year 1919, and Darius Milhaud, the, the jazz fog in the second section of La Creation de Monde in the year 1923. So as we can see, they are being influenced by the just of African American culture, but the compositions I have mentioned are not works in a jazz style. So in motif appropriation, uh, we can see in it that an artist are being influenced by the art of a culture other than their own, so without creating the works in the same style. So they are not creating their arts on the original, based on the original. So they are creating it on their own motive. And the fifth one is the subject appropriation. A final sort of appropriation can be identified that differs from the other sorts. So, what is subject appropriation? It means a subject matter is being appropriated. So, subject appropriation has sometimes been called voice appropriation, particularly when outsiders represents the lives of insiders in the first person. In many discussions of appropriation, concerns have been raised about outsiders who represent it in their artworks individuals or institutions from another culture. When this sort of appropriation occurs, no artistic product of a culture is appropriated. Instead, artists appropriate a subject matter, namely another culture or some of its members. Appropriation art raises questions of originality, authenticity, and authorship, and because of this, it is a useful tool for exploring these concepts. As such, it belongs to a long tradition of modern art and thus goes beyond using tool as an art for showing images and narratives and looks and words instead questioning the nature of art itself. So that concludes our five types or five facets of appropriation. The first one is the object, the second is the content or the non material appropriation, the third one is the style, the fourth is the motif, the fifth is the subject appropriation. Now that you have a grasp on this concept, see what you think of this artist who walk in the line between inspiration and appropriation.
Picasso was also one of the first to use items from the mass media in his work, when he used real objects such as newspaper in his Cubist collages. An early and very poignant example of appropriation in art is Marcel Duchamp's fountain in 1917. This is also a great example of object appropriation, where Duchamp took a men's urinal and placed it on a plinth in a gallery, calling it a fountain. Duchamp didn't change anything else about the urinal except its context and its name. He also signed and dated the work with an alias R. Mat. By making these minor interventions, he completely altered our understanding of this porcelain ball as an object. Surrealism also made an extensive use of appropriation in collages and objects such as Salvador Dali and Lobster Telephone. Appropriation took on new significance in mid-20th century America and Britain with the rise of consumerism and the proliferation of popular images through mass media outlets from magazines to televisions. Appropriated images and objects appear extensively in the pop art of Jasper Johns, Robert Justinberg, Claes Oldenburg, Andy Warhol, Thomas Hillman, and Roy Lichtenstein. So let us consider Andy Warhol's Campbell's Soap Can series in 1961. It is probably one of the best known examples of appropriation art. The images of Campbell's soap cans are clearly appropriated. He copied the original labels exactly but filled up the entire picture plane with their iconic appearance. They reproduced, juxtaposed, or repeated mundane everyday images from popular culture. And these recontextualize familiar images at one projects and reflect the ideas, interactions, needs, desire, and cultural elements of the types. Appropriation is powerful because it raises question about the nature or definition of art. What is originality, authorship, authenticity? Because the purpose of appropriation art for many artists is to show that everything can be seen as copy of something else. That is why to appropriate some see it as acceptable while others view it as pure plagiarism. However, to appropriate is to take possession of something. Appropriation artists deliberately copy images to take possession of them in their art. They are not stealing or plagiarism, nor are they passing off these images as their very own. This is why it is important to understand why artists appropriate the artwork of others. However, the images that are appropriated are transferred into a new context and are wrote into a different light by the artist through something that is added, removed, changed, or altered. So even today, when appropriating, remixing, and sampling images and media is commonplace, it continues to challenge the traditional notions of originality and push the boundaries of what it means to be an artist. Let us all remember that appropriation when art very closely inspires others' art. And that is all. Thank you.